G'day, legends. I hope that you guys are having a fantastic day, a fantastic hump day as Wednesday. And I really, really hope you're having a better day than I am. I just filmed this whole video. It took me 40 minutes to do, and the file corrupted. So if you're seeing this, this one hasn't corrupted, but I'm just going to have to redo the whole video again. But it means I get to spend some more time with you guys. Now, we have a fair bit to go. So, of course, we're going to have a look at the maps. We're going to look at some high-level sacking, some firings in Kiev. We're going to talk about, of course, the horrific terrorist event that took place in Moscow on the weekend. We're going to talk at length about air defense, US aid, the ships down in Crimea, and new artillery packages going into Ukraine as well. So, look, let's just start somewhere I didn't start last time, and I'll probably stuff it up. But we have had word that many ships, up to 4, have been damaged and or destroyed down in Crimea over the past 3 or 4 days. That said, the evidence that has come out of this is very little. There are satellite images showing there has been some level of damage, but as far as completely written off or sunken or large damage, none of the satellite imagery is actually showing that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying that when waiting, at least on this channel, we wait for evidence of things. Now, in some of those claims too, there were 3 Su-27 aircraft as well that were damaged, and we haven't seen anything of that. It's not too much to ask for evidence, and the reason why we don't really need to ask for it is it always presents itself after there's an attack, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in Ukraine. However, where there are claims thrown out instantly both ways, we always get 24, 40, 72, sometimes 96 hours down the line, I should say, we get images. Everyone has a smartphone, everyone has a drone, everyone has a security camera. We get footage, especially with satellites going up over the top. So some new stuff has come out over the past, say, 24 hours. So satellite images of March the 24th. I don't know why people on the other side of the world put the month first and then the day, just go larger, larger, larger. But you can see the damaged reconnaissance ship, the Ivan Hurst. Of course, this one has been targeted before. Now, of course, this photo is from the 23rd, and this one down here is then from the 24th. So this image here, this is the Ivan Hurst, and then this again is the Ivan Hurst here, and you can see some evidence of damage. We line up where this is, some evidence of damage on the port, and maybe some on the ship as well. So it does, yeah, again, to me, this just, I don't know, maybe people are working at NASA and they can read satellite imagery and they work for US on the U-2 bombers, but none of this to me just screams like this is 100% evidence that there's huge damage has occurred. But something in this image, and I just wrote this crappy arrow in here myself, something that does interest me is see that there's a ship now pulled alongside the Ivan Hurst. Now, I think this may be the biggest giveaway of this, is see the distance between these two ships hasn't changed. Has this been listing over, sinking, whatever, and they've had to then tie these two ships together because of damage? Don't know, speculation. We'll wait for further confirmation of what has actually happened down there, but that is bringing us up to 3 ships. Of course, the Yamal and Azov, the landing craft, but then we have today, there's potentially a 4th ship. So Ukraine has claimed yet another successful strike on Russia's Black Sea Fleet, announcing on March 26th. So yesterday, well, time zone, yeah. The landing ship, Konstantin Oleshki, has been hit with a Neptune missile. Of course, a Neptune missile is a domestic-produced anti-ship missile by Ukraine. So this is by Navy spokesman Dmytro Pleticuk, said the damage to the vessel was still being determined. So we don't know how much damage is actually there. This is an older vessel. These landing crafts are landing ships compared to something like a reconnaissance ship like this, or the one we saw taken out last week, nowhere near as important. Potentially. I speculated yesterday that maybe Ukraine is specifically targeting landing ships because maybe they have an idea that there could actually be a what's it called? Amphibious landing into Ukraine. Don't know. I'd say that would be a bloodbath if there was an attempt at that, but it does seem like there's targeting of this. Or are these easier, larger, slower targets to hit opportune targets? Not sure. But some interesting bits about this. It was built in the 85, and this was transferred to the Ukrainian Navy in 1996 when the naval fleet of the Soviet Union was divided up. If you want to see about the naval fleet of the Soviet Union being divided up, there's a documentary called Operation Odessa about drug dealers trying to buy a Soviet submarine. Really interesting down in Odessa. But it was one of Ukrainian ships seized by the Russian forces during the annexation of Crimea in 2014, saying this ship was supposed to be used by Ukraine. Therefore, a decision was made to destroy this unit with our Neptune. So nothing has come out yet of that ship. Wait out. I know it's a lot of waiting on this, but we will see. We'll either see the ship posted by Russia as fine, or we'll see the ship posted by something as not fine. But we just have to wait. Now, some relief for Ukraine's artillery issues. We hear a lot about artillery shell shortage, but what we don't know is how is the shortage of actual guns on the front line and barrels as well. I saw footage over the weekend of an M777 exploding and killing the crew. An M777, of course, a 155 towed artillery piece, and these barrels can only take so many rounds through them. Now, of course, this has a lot to do with inspections, maintenance, and how much charge is also put on the round to go up the bloody spout. But it can sit around 1,500 to 2,000, depending on all of this. Between the barrel has to have, either major maintenance or replacement. We saw this happen to Wagner PMC when they were going into Bakhmut, this time last year, that they couldn't fire the guns at full range because they were wearing out the barrels on them too quickly. But France will soon be able to deliver 78 Caesar howitzers, so that is an SPG, so self-propelled gun, to Ukraine, and will boost its supply of shells to Kyiv. They want to deliver 80,000 shells for it this year, not only for Caesar. 155 will work in any 155 gun, up from the 30,000 delivered since the beginning of the war. So 30,000 delivered a couple of years from France. Of course, France, the ones flexing the muscle saying we're going to go in. It's not very many rounds, and even this 80,000 is not going to meet the amount that Ukraine actually need on the front line. Now, we have articles written a month or so back, say from France 24 and everything, that was saying that these are to come in, or there's going to be a production increase in Caesars in France, and that could be delivered by the start of 2025. So we're not 100% sure when we'll actually then see these Caesars roll onto the front lines in Ukraine, but of course are a very good system. Now, let's speak at length, I guess, about air defense, and then we will then speak and look at what's happening on the maps. It's like I've done this twice. So I want to talk about Patriot systems, as of course, this has been the big speaking point of the day. So Ukraine Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba doesn't mince his words, I say, but he said, give us the damn Patriots. If we had enough air defense systems, namely Patriots, we'd be able to not only protect not only the lives of our people, but also our economy from destruction. So we know that not only are these missiles having a huge effect on military installations, civilian dual-use targets as well, but of course that rolls on and that affects the economy. It's not only export of electricity, but if your coffee shop can't run and you can't buy and sell coffee and goods, this of course has a huge effect on the economy. This is just the Ukraine version of what Ukraine's trying to do to Russia, because Russia is funding its war off its natural resources, off its oil and gas, and the export of these and internal of these too, that if you can cut the head off the gas and the oil in Russia, more quickly they will soak up money into defense for launching this war. But it has a huge effect, and it is having an effect on the hryvnia, as well as we do know that there are in the hundreds of thousands of people without power from last Friday, and it's now Wednesday in Ukraine. Of course, this has a huge effect on many, many different elements. Now, continuing, he says, when Ukrainian troops are losing positions, let's look at the reason why. It is because Russia has begun to massively use upgraded aerial guided bombs. Now, he here is not talking about the positional loss is not due to the Kinzhal or the KH-101s or any of these missiles hitting Kyiv and Odessa and Lviv. That doesn't change the front line. What it does is it takes air defense off the front line. It affects supply behind the line. And if that's not there, then the Su-34s and aircraft like that can then use these guided, well, let's call them the glide bombs that they have, upgraded glide kits, whatever. And that's what's having a huge effect on the front line. That by keeping all that other systems busy, they have freedom of the Russians have freedom of movement of those at the front line and dropping the FABs and rolling through from there. The FABs have been a real boost for Russia, and that is one of the big reasons why they're having success on not only the front line, but then a little bit back from the front line in areas like Chasiv Yar as well. Now, I want to talk about Patriots, as I see some people speculating on things that is both true and false. So I see a lot of people say on Twitter saying that the US has over 1,000 Patriot systems, 1,200 Patriot systems. Why can't they just send one of them or two of them or five of them? Now, this isn't how Patriots work. The US, yes, has 1,200 missile interceptors for Patriot, but it only has around 50 actual batteries of Patriot. So large change in numbers there. But this is a full Patriot setup, depending on Puck 3 or Puck 2 setup. But each Patriot battery, it has a truck-mounted then launching system with 8 launches, or can have less if it wants, and then it has, of course, in these launches, has then 4 missile systems in them as well, the actual interceptor. So those interceptors, what they have then 1,200 of, they then have a ground radar, a control station, and a generator. Now, how much is this full setup? This full setup is about 1.1 billion US dollars. So very, very expensive. Now, depending on the missile in these, it ranges, but on average is about $4 million a missile. So you can see that these are a very expensive system. Now, what we do know, whether this is a good or bad thing, depending on your bias, but what we do know as a fact is that Ukraine has a finite amount of money allocated, where it may be in the billions, and you and I might think, yeah, but billions of dollars is at war. War is expensive. There is a finite amount of money. Now, I've said in length that I think that air defense was very, very important, and I think that there has been spending in other areas that may have more publicity wins, but then we're seeing the problems of this. And I've dug up some old articles that may suggest this, and I think the biggest one is actually in fighter aircraft. And the US, we spoke at length, saying that fighter aircraft is not what Ukraine needed. What it needs is air defense. The training is longer, and there's a lot more expense in this. Fighter aircraft, I know shit, they're incredibly expensive. They use a lot of people, and they need a lot of ancillaries. You don't just have the jet, park it up, and use it. You need to build a runway. You need to build hangars. You need to train pilots. You need to train for every one pilot. There's tens of ground crew on the ground. There's a lot of bloody moving parts. Not only that, the F-16s, wherever they are, will be Ukraine's shiny new toy that Russia then want to have a play with themselves, and that will be their high priority target to use it. So if there's not more of these batteries moved into there, like Patriots are going to have to go there, because Patriots the only thing intercepting some of the missiles, potentially intercepting some of the missiles. We know Patriot is going to have to go to where the F-16s are. So there's going to have to be an air defense allocated to there, and at the moment that's taking it away from other areas. So then we're going to have more of an issue with that too. So let's look over these articles. So this one is from April 26th. So US needs to prioritize Ukraine's urgent needs in its fight against Russia, and those needs don't include advanced air power. Focus has been on Ukrainian priorities for fight and aircraft, while on the list, Western modern aircraft is about 8th on the list. And so we're focused our resources on the highest priorities capabilities, that is air defense, artillery, and armor. Now, artillery, we know there's huge shortages and problems with it at the moment, and air defense, we know, having the same problems as well of just not enough numerical numbers actually of it. And we know near the end of March is when we're being told by the US, by Ukraine, that that's where we're going to have the problems, and we will expect to see more of that, and we will see Russia capitalize on that lack of air defense as well. That Cavalli here, so he's General Christopher Cavalli, head of the US command, I said, Ukraine doesn't need F-16s to deny Russia air superiority. You can deny it with air defenses. In the near term and into the midterm, what Ukraine really needs to do is control the airspace over its country and over its forces. And they've been doing that very effectively with ground-based air defenses. So that the most imperative right now, and it's being very well served by ground-based air defenses. So this is the thing when I say find out a money. To put money somewhere, to allocate here, has to take away from somewhere else. And could have it been spent better of. I know foresight is the hindsight of arseholes, but we had the foresight from other articles as well. So this was Feb 28th last year before the decisions were made on these, saying that we don't see F-16s as a top priority. Again, that it is air defense. New aircraft, 11 billion. Don't worry about that. They're not new, but used ones at about 2 billion, and it'll take 18 to 24 months to then go in. Now, this 2 billion, this is the aircraft. You've got a lot of ancillaries around that, and I'd hate to know how much it is to rebuild runways, rebuild hangars, train all the personnel, all of this other stuff that all costs money. That is it taking away from something that was a higher priority because it tracks better in the media? I don't know. Anyway, it is a top priority for Ukrainians, but it's not one of their top 3 priorities. But we will see those enter at some point, basically any week now. There's been speculation that they were then already there, but it will be interesting to see the effect that those actually have. Now, we are 15 minutes in. Let's have a look at the maps. I thought this would be quicker this time, but here's Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, and of course the purple since 14. Of course, this is Crimea down here. Now, on this map here, it doesn't show much change except for one down in Avdiivka. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, for those asking, why do I use 2 maps? Well, we know that maps have a bias. If you click on this map that we now know is affiliated with the Ukrainian MOD, and you've got pigs come up on it showing the Russians, you've got Ukrainian flags, you've got donations, you've got blah, 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 whatever. You can assume that there's going to be some bias. Now, I'm not saying that the Syriac map doesn't have a bias, but the bias may go the other way, so we then try and level and even it out and get things from different areas, if that makes sense. I'm trying to show you where the map actually bloody sits. So here, of course, is Bakhmut. We'll zoom in on it and we'll bring up what Syriac says and shows in this region. So a couple of little differences between this map. Now, this is what you get when you have things translated from Spanish to Russian or from English to Ukrainian. This is what the difference is on these. But we'll look at this Kalinina, whatever it says down in this map, but this is this Kalinivka just out from Bodanivka. So, of course, this dot simulates then, or emulates Bodanivka here. So there is some ground being made here, and just saying that in this tree line up here, but both maps don't line up currently, so we're not 100% sure. Some here and apparently some in here. But Syriac is saying situation north of Bakhmut. During the last 36 hours, Russian army entered in new areas inside Borodivka, reaching the center of the locality following the withdrawal of the Ukrainian army. In addition, Russian troops made small advances in the forest area just northwest of it, like we showed. Now, there's nothing down in Klishkivka and Rivka, nothing through then places like New York. I love saying that. I put up a video once when I was in New York getting shelled, and I thought it was the best clickbait ever. I put up like New York gets shelled by the Russians, and it was like one of my worst performing videos, and I thought that was like pinnacle clickbait, but apparently not. Now, come down into Avdiivka here, where we know the Russians are pushing very hard. Now, let's scroll back one day and then to today. So we do see this expansion of control out from Stepovy towards Berdachi here, but most interestingly, I think, is actually the grey zone movement. We're seeing the grey zone push further on the other side of then the Derna River, but a little bit less in the center of Semenivka. But at the moment, there's no red over the western side of the Derna River. Of course, this river here, this is the first line of defenses after then what was Avdiivka. This is the second line runs through where my cursor is. You can see that. Now, let's then look at what is then being said in this area. So, again, you can confirm this while we use 2 maps. That in basically the same area, you can see where this little reservoir is, but it's slightly different, but same overall. There was a change somewhere in this direction that both maps are lining it up. But Russian army made small advance north of Badachi, that we spoke about, and in the eastern shore of the Derna River. In addition, Russian troops began crossing the river to the western shore opposite to Olivka and south of Semenivka. So they're saying that Olivka and south, so just down here of Semenivka, that they are crossing. Now, map doesn't show that, but there is a show of expanded grey zone there. And this, of course, is what then Syriac is showing as those changes. So we will see maybe there has been a pass through or up to that line of defenses. We're not 1,000,000% sure. We want the maps to show itself all the same. Now, Novomai Livka down here, this is where we saw this jump up and closing up of about 50% of the territory. We also saw some drone footage just on the corner of this building, I want to say 2 weeks ago, of a drone targeting a Russian soldier. So we definitely know the Russians are somewhere in around here with infantry. So definitely grey zone, maybe red. But then we bring up then the Syriac map, and you can just see that this area, what is just here, has then made red, as well as this part just up above this paddock here along this tree line. So again, not being shown on the maps, but maybe it will come up or down. Now, where we will move from here is down into Robotny Verbovy front. Now, this is the area where the maps are showing the most different. Now, what we suspect is what Russia is trying to do is get back the Surovikin line, their line of defenses through here, which most of them held against Ukraine's famed counteroffensive last year. Most of them did hold. The majority is still here and being reinforced. It was really this part out from Verbovy where they got hit and breached. That Russia is trying to regain that, as well as ones near Robotny as well. So there's not a weak point in it. Now, this is where these lines are sitting. So Syriac is saying that they are fully captured. It depends what map you are looking at to say and show if they are or aren't. Now, there's no change on the deep state map, but this is saying situations up front. During the last 5 days, Russian army made new gains south of Robotny. The situation at the center of the locality hasn't changed. On the other hand, Russian forces intensified the attacks northwest of Verbovy and forced Ukrainian army to retreat from positions in the axis where clashes continue. So just to the northwest of Verbovy, up around this direction that they did push in apparently, and down near Novoporovka, what of course sits between Robotny and here. So somewhere in this direction, sort of where this grey zone is showing, but the maps aren't showing any change. Now, while we're on the maps, because I'm going to show you a map, even if I haven't got it open yet, you'll see me come to and from, but we have this in the MOD update. Now, recruiting adverts have been posted for the new 44th Army Corps in Luga, in the newly established Leningrad military district. Russia is making efforts to expend its forces in the northwest of the country, as most of its forces remain dedicated to operations in Ukraine. Russia will almost certainly have to decide whether units such as the 44th remain in the garrison locations once established, or if they are transferred to operations in Ukraine. Newly established units have previously been sent to combat in Ukraine. It's almost certain that the need to sustain operations is hampering Russia's wider force expansion ambitions. So in relation to this, Russia's blessing and curse is just the size of land mass that it is, well over 2 times the size of any other country. So this is, of course, Ukraine, Belarus. We'll talk about Belarus in a second. This is Russia here. It's bloody massive amount of land. But, of course, most of its forces are down in the east and south of Ukraine down here. But they still have an absurd amount of border to protect, from places like Kazakhstan, Mongolia, China where there's a border, North Korea where there's a border, and of course this is Alaska over here, so there'll be troops all the way out here, thousands of bloody kilometers away. They still need troops in these areas to target somewhere down in here. So they're going to have to raise new guys that aren't just going straight into Ukraine, as well as there may be more experienced people in those areas in the war. Now, let's talk about a sacking. So what we do know is over the past couple of weeks or months, really, the highest being General Zaluzny, replaced by Sursky. We don't hear much about Sursky at the moment, but was the sacking of Zaluzny, the replacement with Sursky, and of course a number of other of those senior Ukrainian officials in Kyiv being swapped out, changed, and a reshuffle there. And some even spoke about, is there maybe a snake in the grass because we're seeing more targeting against Patriots and HIMARS and everything? Is that why there's a change? We're not really sure, but there is definitely a lot of reshuffling happening in that upper echelon. And today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky put out a decree and the dismissal of Alexei Danilov from the post of Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council. And this was about all the information we had. We don't have anything else on what has actually taken place here. Now, this is from Reuters, I believe. This is like the most information I could find on it. And Alexei, Danilov, he did do a post on Facebook as well, just like thanking Zelensky for the time, but it wasn't anything like there's points of what actually happened. But the replacement for him is this Alexander Litvinenko, who's 51, and he was at least the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, but they're saying he has no public profile. Zelensky in his nightly address. He also spoke about the replacement here, but that this bloke, Alexander, would combine experience as an intelligence chief with tasks Ukraine's face in terms of security and defense. That's about all we know, but we know it's not rare to see these reshuffles, but I don't think reshuffles are ever a really good thing to be seeing at such a critical time in the war either, especially if we potentially looking at offensives in a month, 2 months away. I don't know. Now, let's talk about US aid, and then we'll talk about Moscow. So, aid. We do know that the amount of aid that Ukraine needs, they need the US on board. That, yes, the EU and Australia and other countries, Japan and South Korea, may be able to fill in areas, but as far as just the might of the US, none of that even comes close, especially with just the amount you see as well. And of course, $60 billion has been hung in the House of Reps, but Politico had this article as well, that Congress approved $300 million for Ukraine last week. Remember that, we talked about it and it was very celebrated. But the Pentagon spent it 4 months ago. When Congress approved $300 million to arm Ukraine last week, it marked the first time lawmakers approved new funding for Kyiv's war effort in more than a year. There's just one problem. The money is already gone. The cash allocated to Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, so the ASAI, you'll see it referred to as, was included in a $1.2 trillion government funding package signed by Biden on Saturday. But the money was actually obligated in November while the Pentagon was operating under a temporary continuing resolution. So while its passage might have worked as a brief bipartisan win, so showing that, both sides are here trying to get people on board, from Republicans, Democrats, everyone here, it was essentially a symbolic move. The $300 million is not available for us to use now. And this asks a lot of questions about, well, if it's not there, is the well of money for Ukraine actually more dry than we initially thought? We know there's still some drawdown authority, we think, but how dry actually is the funding for Ukraine, especially if that House of Reps doesn't go through? All we know, the House of Reps is on a 2-week recess, so nothing's going to be decided for at least 2 more weeks. But this thing continues. The security, so this is the USAI, puts money toward contracts for future deliveries of munitions and equipment for Ukraine. But the $300 million in November exhausts the remaining USAI funds currently available for support. It shows long-term commitment, and that's a positive thing. This is from Representative Jason Crow. But what we know is, like they said then in this article, that it's more of then a symbolic move. But short-term problem we have is that Ukrainians needed our support yesterday. So the longer this goes forward, the harder it is to backfill. But the only solution from here, administration officials argue, is for the House to pass tens of billions of dollars worth of new assistance. So we don't know what's happening with this assistance yet. We know it's being held up by the Speaker. We know there's a lot of problems here as well with will it, won't it, what happens if it doesn't, what happens if it does. But it's just interesting to see that money that was, promised and, we're going to have 300 million, it was spent a long time ago already. Now, let's talk about the horrific, murderous attack that happened against civilians in Moscow. Of course, media, social media, everyone has just run with this, trying to pull together what they can to further their narrative. Whether your narrative is it was an inside job, false flag, whether your narrative is Ukraine did it, whether your narrative is Willie did it, whether your narrative is IS did it, whatever. Everyone's trying to pull whatever they can to try and further the narrative and further the propaganda and, cash in on this for then their side of the argument. Now, Aussie Defender has come up with this, and I named it. I'm glad someone said it. But he says, pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian accounts are both playing a game right now of who can post the stupidest conspiracy theory about the terror attack in Moscow, or why IS is sitting on the sidelines, already having claimed responsibility and provided plenty of evidence. And there are conspiracy theories popping up left, right, and center, even from officials as well. Now, one of the ones I want to share with you today, which is going a little bit of everywhere, is then this. So these accounts are sharing that the people in similar blue clothing are FSB agents. And this isn't just one account. These are many accounts, some with hundreds of thousands of followers. So saying that these guys in the jeans and blue tops in the concert hall are FSB agents, that they're there conducting then the bloody inside attack, whatever. But this doesn't actually, this isn't evidence of anything. You've just got guys in similar clothing. And what I can say about like Eastern European Russian men is maybe they're not the most expansive, fruitful dresses in the world. Like, wear a lot of very bland clothing. Compare it to like, I don't know, Portland or something, Oregon. Like, you know, it's very plain. Like, this doesn't surprise. This is like your usual getup. So I don't know. I don't think this doesn't prove anything. This is just speculation. Now, there's more of this as well. So another guy in the crowd in the blue top and jeans here, they're saying that then this is him from the arrest of one of the terrorists. They're saying that this is then this same guy. Now, the evidence of having a watch on your left wrist, sorry, not evidence. But I will say, yeah, he may look similar. I don't know. You know, people from different countries look different to other people. Sorry, everyone, but people may look similar in one place to somewhere else in the world. I personally don't see this as enough to say that this is this guy. Another thing pointed out was the blue and blue, but this is like a sweatshirt, like a t-shirty shirt, like long sleeve. This is definitely like a puffer jacket. So, look, I don't know. There's just a lot of conspiracies floating around everywhere, and we see them as well with that. Oh, they opened up an area to get back into Ukraine, which of course then Lukashenko today basically bloody threw that out as well. So let's talk about this. Now, in this, you'll see that there's not one from Ukraine, because Ukraine is just being firm that we had nothing to do with this. And personally, I think if Ukraine had something to do with this, it would be an incredibly stupid, silly move, because this is uniting Russia more than ever. This is why I was so heavily critical of the Ukrainian-backed forces, Ukrainian forces crossing into places like Kursk and Belgorod too. I think it had the exact opposite effect than what they wanted. They went there, we're going to unite these people and whatever. You fired multiple launch rocket systems on areas where the civilians, those civilians are not going to go, they're the good guys. They're not going to do that. It's going to have the exact opposite effect. Now, let's have a look at this. So this is the second half of what I couldn't get yesterday from Putin. This leads to the next question. Who stands to benefit from it? Well, to be honest, it is Russia from this attack, as far as the unity, bringing people together, further recruitment, further justification of the war is Russia. They are the ones who stand to benefit from it, just like other attacks we have seen previously. Now, I'm not saying that confirms that it is a false flag or it's this or that. I'm just saying, but as far as this attack, who stands to benefit from it? Russia. I don't see there's any benefit in Ukraine doing this. Maybe, you know, to show behind the line there's more attacks, but as far as unifying people, bringing it together, and this is exactly what I'm speaking about, are those crossings into Belgorod and Kursk, I think is the exact opposite. But this becomes even more apparent today as their much touted counteroffensive has failed completely, as acknowledged by everyone, and is no longer disputed. The Russian armed forces are maintaining the initiative all along the entire front line, while the enemy's efforts to stabilise the front have been unsuccessful. And this is true. Their much touted counteroffensive, it did fail, and it's not being disputed anymore. And the Russian forces are having a lot more success and do maintain the initiative along most of the front line, or any area where there's actual movements. Now, hence the attempts to infiltrate our border territories and establish a presence there, artillery attacks, including use of multiple launch rockets on peaceful residential areas and civilian infrastructure facilities, such as power grids, and attempt to launch missiles at Crimean Bridge and Crimean Peninsula itself. So saying that because Russia's having success actually on the front line and that the offensive then failed, that's why we're seeing more attacks into border territories and down into Crimea as well against infrastructure. And that is probably correct, but that doesn't then say that then they committed then this attack either. That these two probably then line up, but it doesn't then mean that this is why this other attack happened. Now, power grid dual use, you can target that, whether it's Russia targeting Ukraine, Ukraine targeting Russia, whether it's you targeting mine. Power grid can be targeted. It's dual use. Now, we have then this from the chief of the FSB, Alexander Bortnikov. And of course, this is being reported from Russian news channels. Now, of course, the bloody head of the FSB is not going to talk to me, but the US, Britain, and Ukraine are behind the terrorist attack on Crocus Hall. It said, we believe that this is true in any case. We're now talking with the factual information we have. Now, he believes Ukraine has been trying to prove it's capable enough. What is expected to do with to demonstrate its capability? It is expected to carry out sabotage and terrorist attacks in the rear. This is what both the chiefs of Ukraine's special services and British special services are aiming at. US special services have repeatedly mentioned this too, saying there have been drone strikes by uncrewed boats at sea and incursions by groups of saboteurs and terrorist organizations into our territory. And this all does line up to paint a picture here. But, is it made to line up to do that also? And has it been the right time for it? Who is to benefit the most? Just correlation doesn't mean causation of certain events. Now, initially, the idea was that these terrorists tried to flee and were going towards Ukraine. What Putin and the Kremlin and Russia were saying was they were trying to flee towards Ukraine. Now, Alexander Lukashenko, of course, who's the president of Belarus, has said very differently. Now, this is being quoted a little bit of everywhere, but if you want to read the full initial article, Belta is Belarus's news thing, so you can actually go and read the full thing on Belta. This is what we have here, but after the tragedy, some media outlets did not rule out the possibility that terrorists were planning to escape to Belarus through Bryansk Oblast. So let's look here. We'll have Bryansk into Belarus. I've stuffed up my recording again, but it will be all right. If the last little bit has been dodgy, I stopped my screen recording, but hopefully it'll be all right. Today's video is not going well. Anyway, he dismissed these assumptions, saying they could not enter Belarus. Their handlers, who he says we have suspicions about, some of them, I'll call Putin and share my suspicions. So the handlers, of course, sit above then who carried this out. They're the ones that funded it, that trained it, that then launched the attack. Now, they knew it would be a very bad idea to try and enter Belarus because Belarus immediately reinforced security measures, just like a part of Oblast in Russia. So he said he got a call basically from KGB, FSB, saying, hey, this is what just happened, close the thing up. Anyway, he says that military border, blah, 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 but he said that that's why there was no chance they could enter Belarus. They realized it, so they took a turn and headed to the Ukraine-Russian border. Now, that's very interesting. I hope that Lukashenko doesn't find himself in a private jet anytime soon, because that undermines what Putin has been saying about that there was like a safe passage set up somewhere for them to cross back into Ukraine. That what he's saying is they were originally trying to come for Belarus and couldn't, and then turned to try and get back down into Ukraine. So it does undermine some of that. But of course, it's all up in the air at the moment and is incredibly politically fueled. As much as I'll say on this is, we know who stand to benefit the most from it. That doesn't then mean you then did it, but IS has claimed responsibility for it. IS has done horrific things in the past. You would never put anything like this past them. There's been terror-style events taken out by Russia and Ukraine as well. Of course, Russia has had plenty of them, the whole bloody invasion, but then we can see, against Nord Stream pipeline, across into areas in Belgrade, we've seen areas of this as well. So, look, I think where you need to go is who stands to benefit the most from this. But again, causation, correlation, what's actually happened. Well, what I know actually happened is, well over 100 people got murdered on a night out. It was meant to be a fun night out in a city, and it is absolutely horrific. And of course, now everyone is capitalizing their narratives on this and finger pointing where they can. Legends, I've stuffed up everything today, technological-wise. If this video even goes up, I'll be stoked. But look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.